Hi, Marina. Thank you so much for joining me today. So before we start to talk about anything ethics related, I really wanted you to introduce yourself. Tell me about your undergraduate experience, your graduate experience, and I know you have a lot of jobs. You've had a lot of jobs throughout the years, and I'm very impressed by that. And what you are doing today, and also anything that you wanted to share with us about yourself.
Oh, thank you, Elizabeth. It's wonderful. It's a pleasure to be with you. And I was born in Uruguay, South America. We immigrated to the United States when I was 18. 4 weeks later, I was attending school at Kent University. It was a college that was like 4 miles only from my parents' house. And the goal for my parents was to move from Uruguay and for my brother and I to attend college. So that, like I said, 4 weeks later, we were in college and we were given off wonderful opportunities because we're talking about the late 1970s in which there were accessible programs for students like my brother and I, who just came from another country. And that made it really easy for us to be engaged in our academic experience, besides also being very grateful that we were able to do that. I got an undergraduate degree on social work, a bachelor's in social work. Then I moved to California to pursue my master's degree. I went to the University of Southern California and I earned a master's degree in mental health. I have worked at hospitals as a social worker. I was social worker for the child abuse and neglect team at Children's Los Angeles. I work as a neonatologist social worker in Pomona Valley Hospital. Those places are in California. We moved to Colorado and I took a few years off to stay home with my children. And then I slowly started working at the Boulder Mental Health as a child psychotherapist. After that, I decided I didn't want to do psychotherapy anymore. And I was offered an opportunity to teach part-time at MetroStars University. Moving forward, 6 years later, I was asked to, if I wanted to switch from affiliate faculty to a tenure track position. I said yes. I taught in the department in social work for 6 years and I became a tenured faculty professor. And a couple of years later, I applied for a position at the dean's office and I got that job and I was dean for 6.5 years. Mm-hmm. Now, currently I am retooling, which means that I've stepped down from my position as associate dean. Mm-hmm. I just want to spend more time with family and I'll start teaching in August of 2022. So it seems like a really long road, but it has happened very, very fast.
Yeah. I remember when I first met you and you were a dean and I know you've grown so much. I've seen you grow so much from being a dean to now being a professor. And I'm happy you're doing something that you enjoy doing and you've always enjoyed doing. So yeah. So in terms of the conversation, like I said, this was more centered around ethics. And one of the first questions that I want to ask you is, what does ethics mean to you? Like, what does ethical leadership look like to you in your experiences?
Well, leadership is the big conversation, especially when you're in an associate dean position. So you go to conference about leaderships, you go to workshops to improve your leadership, you attend webinars to develop leadership skills. It's a big thing. I see ethical leadership as when individuals behave according to a set of principles and values that are recognized by the majority as a sound basis for the common good. I personally, because of my training in social work and my mental health experience in social justice and awareness of oppression, I follow the values and ethics of the social work profession when I lead. I also include other leadership values such as respect, trust, fairness, transparency. Ethical leadership is intentional. You just don't wake up one morning and say, well, I'm going to be an ethical leader. You really need to make a conscious decision to lead in an ethical manner. And it's a lot of work, but I think the benefits outgrow the work.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we talk about a lot in our classes. Like, you're right, we don't wake up and do ethical things, or we're like, today I'm going to be an ethical leader. Right. Sometimes when we're tasked with those things, we don't necessarily think about what we're going to do in a situation. Sometimes our desired outcome isn't what we want or what we should have done. So thank you for your response. So you worked as a professor, and so I wanted to ask you, what does acting ethically look like to you as a professor and as a dean? I'm sure you've encountered situations where you've been put in a spot where you probably wouldn't have done things that you should have done. So
yes, it's interesting because in a way it's a dichotomy, because As a faculty member, you have certain responsibilities and duties to your students, to your department, and to the university. As a professor, you have concrete tasks that you need to do. You need to teach and teach well. You need to be on time for your classes. You need to grade papers in a thoughtful and impartial manner. That means ethical, right? You need to mentor and support students. I need to be aware of power, oppression, and privilege issues that come up in the classroom, and that they are the systemic reality in the campus and in society at large. So as a faculty member, I have ethical considerations and behaviors that I have to demonstrate when working with students. For example, set clear boundaries. You don't go out to drinks with a student until they finish the class with you and they're old enough to drink. Certain limits and boundaries are really important to be respectful of the student, to be aware of your position of power as a faculty member. Confidentiality. Students many times, as you know, will talk to a professor they like or they trust about their personal lives or personal situations they are encountering.
Yes.
You need to be fair, not create situations in which you have a favorite student and then the student that you don't like.
Yeah.
You need to be constantly aware of, not because there's going to be situations in which you have a student in which you have a lot you're familiar with or that you have in common with. So you may strike up a friendship with that student in a sense, but when you are teaching that student, you need to be fair and impartial, because it's not fair to another student.
Yeah.
You also need to understand diversity and inclusion issues, because our students, especially brown and Black students, are dealing with issues in today's world. It's not a safe place anymore.
Mm-hmm.
There aren't that many safe places left, right?
Yes.
If you listen to the news.
Yes.
So you need to be really aware and sensitive to those issues. You need to be self-aware in terms of what are your triggers and what are the things that you bring to the classroom. Mm-hmm. And you also have to have an awareness of the world in order to understand what path or journey your students are in. Yes. So as a dean, it's a switch, right? Yes. Because your role is different and your responsibilities are very different. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was a faculty and students affairs associate dean, and I dealt with behavior or issues that came up with faculty and students. So there was always people coming to me when there was an issue. I also did other things. I did mentoring for new faculty. Mm-hmm. I was in the diversity and inclusion committee. I participated in many searches, when we hire new faculty, but primarily my role was to deal with faculty and students affairs. And once again, I led with social work values and principles, because they are very clear. It's service, social justice, dignity and worth of the person, the importance of human relationships, integrity, and competence. So if I am being fair, if I understand the job I have to do, if I do it well, and if I treat people with respect, I consider myself an ethical leader.
Yeah, that makes sense. Just out of curiosity as well, like, what have you ever been put in a situation as a dean where you've encountered like an ethical dilemma, or like you have an example of a time when you were confronted with a difficult situation? Because in our class, we talk a lot about kind of our blind spots, and we're all human. We make mistakes. There are times when our decisions are made and we don't necessarily want to make that decision, but we're so blinded to like some of the things that we do that we forget to be ethical in some situations. Like what we were talking about in class, like sometimes like you tell your mom a lie and then that lie kind of continues and you have to keep on with the lie, and your mom asks you every time and you have to keep on adding to the lie, remembering what that lie was. And that's a simple example, but I was just curious, what in your experience, like, is there any ethical dilemmas you've encountered?
Yeah, my mother used to say, las mentiras tienen patas cortas, meaning that you didn't go very far with lies, right? Yeah. Lies have short legs, and it's true. And when you create a lie, you have to embellish to make your point along the storyline. As a faculty and students affairs dean, I dealt with multiple issues with students and faculty. Most of them were around behavior or performance issues. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to be very cautious when I describe examples because of confidentiality. Yes. But generally speaking, I can tell you that when it came to maybe faculty issues, I dealt with issues of misuse of funds, individuals who created a toxic environment for the peers or for students, individuals who behave in discriminatory or harassing ways to others, individuals who live unethically, and with disregard for people's, feelings or work, and poor professional performance. Students, I dealt with situations in which there was plagiarism, plagiarizing exams or finding an exam from someone else and forgetting to change the name of that other person, and they turn in the exam. I also work with, there is an incredible amount of mental health issues among students, and they had perceptions of things that were happening that were not completely accurate. And as I said earlier, what I do is I try to lead with empathy. I try to listen always to the other person's story, because if it comes to me, it usually comes as a complaint from someone else. So I already have part of the story. So I get the other person to tell me their side of the story.
Yeah.
And my role was to try to problem solve. Sometimes we couldn't solve a problem. And there were consequences. People were written off, or they were given a warning. So it was a very busy, interesting job. In terms of how I, if I'm satisfied with the way, I dealt with certain situations, I felt that I was a very conscious, intentional leader, and I went out of my way to be fair and impartial. But there's always opportunity for growth and enlightenment. So we can always do better, or to think in a way that, yes, this worked out, but had I done this, or had I had a meeting instead of making it a phone call, it would have become better. Or this person was really triggering me with their poor attitude, and maybe I was a little short. So those things happen, but I think we need to learn from that.
I think, that's very valid. Like, one of the things that we've done in our class is kind of evaluate dilemmas. And one of the dilemmas has been centered around like environmental action. And we kind of had to like justify, because each of us as students has had to evaluate situations on an ethical lens. And so it's interesting to see like other people's perspectives and the way that they think. So you're right. Yeah, there's always opportunities for growth. Always, like, every time we evaluate those conversations that we've had as a group, we've always come to like, hey, you could have done this way, or other situations. And then what happened recently in like Buffalo, New York, we've had conversations about how deans or deans here at DU, or people in power at DU, are making a difference in how they address those issues. So it's always interesting to hear what they have to say and how they address themselves when students ask, like, what are you doing now? You said you were going to do that last time. So
and don't we go through a lot of those, right? With Buffalo, with with the high school in Florida, in terms of gun control, right? What are we waiting? What are we waiting? Is this ethical? Is this right? Is this for the common good, as we think in ethical, behaviors? That's not good for the common good. Is this right? It's not right. It's pretty simple. But the lesson is that there are other systems that are an issue that have an impact that may not turn things the way we want them to be. Yeah.
It's all intertwined, and
it is very much so. You're right.
A lot of our, I guess, leaders don't necessarily understand ethics and how that plays a role, because they're so focused on like, oh, we have to meet a certain goal, or we don't do this because of money, or X, Y, and Z, but they don't understand how race, ethnicity, or other issues are intertwined with the things that they do on a daily basis.
Right.
So it's
the intersectionality of all those identities, right? How are they and how they play into it? And I think sometimes it comes to lack of knowledge. Some people are leaders or they're public figures, but they may not have the ethical knowledge or the social justice knowledge piece that some of us share and are always try to learn more of.
Yes. So kind of changing a little bit the conversation. I know for myself, when I first started at DU, the same person that came to DU is not coming out. I don't think the same way. I've had to change my perspective about issues that surround women, people of color, all BIPOC communities. So I'm curious, like, how has your view of like ethical leadership changed over time throughout your lifetime, not just at MSU?
Right. Well, I was not aware of leadership skills in my 20s, and colleges were not talking about it a lot. I think this is fairly new in the sense of my first class, sociology class, the professor told us about the melting pot. No one would call today the United States the melting pot. It's an insult to everyone. We don't melt. We are not, we don't bleed into each other. It's not a melting pot. It's more like a salad. You have a group of people, but you have different parts of the salad, the tomato, the potatoes, So what I tried to say is that teaching, pedagogy, and a lot of the issues that we're talking about, oppression and all that, it's a little more current now. But my leadership has changed and evolved. And not also as I mature professionally, but also as I grow older, I get to see more, experience more, be in different situations. So I love the process of mastering and competency. I like to learn and I like to do it better the next time. And that is a process that keeps me engaged, being part of and following what's happening and understanding it. As a new associate dean, I had to learn to see the big picture versus the small picture in a department, right? In your department. And I had to become familiar with multiple systems, policies, university rules, things that I didn't have to learn as a faculty member. For 6.5 years, I learned a lot about university processes and norms and how power was carried and how decisions were made. And how many leaders in senior leadership have all very different leading styles.
Yeah.
I also had to learn a lot about myself. Since the role of associate dean, it's very different, and it's not something that you are specifically trained or go to school for. There's a lot of self-learning. So I had to change the paradigm from professor to administrator because the situations were different, and I had to learn different strategies to address the issues that were being presented to me. So I guess in a nutshell, yes, I have evolved a lot and have changed a lot. And as you know, once you see something, you can never unsee it again, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going back to faculty with the leadership skills that I developed and used in my deanship.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's also like another one of the things that we talk about in our class, where we talk about different leadership styles. And I remember when I first started the leadership program, I used to think of a leader as a white male, and I'm like, no, that's not what it is. So I think it's really interesting what you hit on about different people's leadership styles and how they carry themselves with, especially in administration. So
especially administration, and when there are so many pieces moving constantly.
Yeah. And so they play a big role in universities. So I noticed that here too. So they're kind of in a sense out of touch with students sometimes. So
I guess especially if they're administrators who haven't been faculty, it's, it takes a while to kind of see it. So, And I think students have such an important role in universities. That's why it's so important to have affinity groups for students, advisory groups, right? Where students have an input.
Yeah. So with that said, I wanted to ask, why in your time as a dean, why do you think it has been hard sometimes we kind of touched on it a little bit. It's maybe centered around them not understanding, but why do you think it's hard for people to act in leadership roles or act ethically, my bad, or even know what it means to act ethically?
I think some leaders are more intuitive than others. You have some people who have a command of the room. They know how to read the room. They're able to come with conclusions faster and sooner. I think also those skills can be learned. There are skills that can be developed and nurtured to become a thoughtful, ethical leader. Some individuals prefer to lead with other characteristics. Instead of ethical leading, they may prefer to deal with other ways of managing people or organizations. I think sometimes you have an ethical leadership that is not intentional, that you are not doing the common good to your organization because you have a lack of knowledge or skills, and kind of you don't know better. I know that's not justified at all, not doing it right, but I draw a line between, unintended or intentional. Then you may have other leaders that have unethical behaviors and they make decisions that are intentional or unfair or cruel to benefit themselves, or that they do not align with the policies or the processes of the organization. And like we discussed earlier, being an ethical leader takes a lot of effort. However, engaging people, making people feel seen and heard as part of the organization, it pays off in, satisfaction, retention, employees really standing up for the organization. Doing good is never bad.
I mean, have you ever been put in situations when maybe people weren't necessarily, the majority of people were going towards a decision and that decision wasn't so ethical? Were you able to I know you're someone who speaks up, I know you are, but have there been cases where you've kind of had to push that, hey, we need to reevaluate this because this is not okay?
Yeah, I've been put in situations, and as I became a more experienced leader, I was able to stand up more for things that I believed. early on, I was learning the law of the land, and it's a steep curve to go from faculty to, to administration. But as I became more experienced, and I also was more self-aware, I was able to speak up more and to stand for what I believed. And even a couple of times there were unpopular ideas, but I felt the need to be clear on that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think also I was, along those lines, we talked a little bit about your experience as a dean and how you made decisions as an ethical leader. What kind of key factors would you look for, like when you were, asked to evaluate a student, and what kind of action did you take?
Right. I was a strong student advocate because I've always tried to walk the shoes of the other person.
Yeah.
And I know that it's intimidating and scary to be sitting at the dean's office. So I was always very conscious about that. And I never wanted to create an environment that felt oppressive or intimidated for students or for faculty. I don't believe in oppressing or intimidating people. And I don't see that as a way of problem solving. So I was always very mindful of creating a place that allow people to feel at least safe. When I was faced with ethical dilemmas, again, social work, and I keep bringing my career, and it's not applied to recruit new social workers, but if anyone is interested, please reach out. I use it, social work as a specific model to deal with dilemmas because, it's a profession that is so much ingrained with people and children and pain and suffering and trauma that we have a process of how to solve problems because sometimes things are not one way or the other, sometimes things are in the middle. And how do you find that? So to me, it was a good guide to follow the steps. The first step was to assess the situation, right? Gather all the information that you need to gather. I love collecting data, love it. So if there was an issue with the student, I would talk to the department chair, I would talk to the professor, and then I would meet with the student. So I get everyone's perspective.
Yeah.
And I would try to describe the situation in a way that describe the facts versus the feelings. What are the contextual factors? What are we dealing with here? The step number 2 was to diagnose or identify the ethical problem. I told you earlier, a student did submit a paper that was somebody else's and forgot to change the name of the student that actually wrote the paper. Yeah. It was a very clear-cut case of plagiarism, right? But you still try to, there is a policy that says a student can be failed when they do that.
Yeah.
Faculty member wasn't sure what they wanted to do, so they sent this up to the dean's office. So I'm like, first of all, what were you thinking when you did that? I mean, really? And clarify the issue and look at the basic moral issues. What kind of disciplinary action are we going to deal with? Because you can get a D on the paper, you can get a permanent D on the course, or, people could be expelled for that. It all depends how you go around that, right? Yeah. I don't find it very growth producing for a student to expel them from the course or to give them a permanent F. So I think it through, what are we going to do? But I also am working with the faculty member because the ultimate person that gets a student a grade is the faculty member, not the dean. We don't change grades. So you diagnose, identify the problem, then you plan how you're going to solve this ethical dilemma. Like I said, this was a clear dilemma, but let's suppose that the dilemma was the faculty member wanted an F and the chair was saying, the policy was saying, well, he needs to be expelled. Yeah. For the sake of the argument here. Well, how do you discuss this? How do you realize which course of action is going to make things better for everyone involved? And can I live with that course of actions that we're deciding on? Yeah. Do I feel a good ethical person, as a good ethical person working this problem? The fourth step is implement the changes that you're going to take and evaluate the decision. Always reevaluate every step. Am I doing this right? Who is benefiting? Who is not benefiting? Who's feeling that this is fair? And that really works out for me, to assess, think it through, have a plan, implement, and problem solve. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, like I said, in our class, we've done multiple, actually we've gone through a series of even 12 steps where we've evaluated ethical dilemmas. And right now I can't remember the names, but I'll let you, I'll probably reach back out.
I like to hear about the 12 steps. Yeah, there are many ways of solving a dilemma. And it's also related to how big is the issue. And like I said, this one was fairly simple.
Yeah.
But there are issues that are very complicated. And you need to have lots of steps and a lot of working. With different, also with different parties, right? Sometimes it's not up to you to solve one dilemma.
Yeah. I think the one thing that keeps coming in my mind is, I don't know if you heard about pioneers, but pioneers is obviously related to like colonialism, and DU was built on genocide and of the Native American tribes that lived here. And so I think that definitely reminds me of that a little, and thinking about it, for me, because of my background, I obviously side on more so on the side of Native American students, but for faculty, administration, stakeholders, people donating, like that's how they know DU. And it's hard to put ourselves in those shoes sometimes, to like think about them. So
Right.
even though I don't necessarily agree with them. So it's, yeah, when we talk about ethics, like, do we also consider those people's opinions, even though it's not necessarily benefiting a community, but it is benefiting another community? So.
Right. That's a dilemma. That's a big dilemma that you would need your 12 steps for, because acknowledging the wrongs done to a population, right, and the land that it's taken, it's the big step. And it's a step towards reconciliation. Will it give people back what they lost? No, but at least you are trying to reconcile and to amend errors and hurts.
Yeah, and it's hard to get people to understand. It's hard to get people to walk in your shoes sometimes.
Yeah.
So.
And it's good to think about, how would I walk on that person's shoes? Not mine, them. And that sometimes helps, you know. Let's say if I have a student that was very upset coming to the office, a faculty member that was very angry, I would say, okay, what is it like to be them right now? Just for me to stand there and get, you know, have empathy and respect and patience.
Yeah, so I think this conversation, you know, also reminds me of like instances in our class. We also talk about a book we're reading called Blind Spots. And they talk about how groups who usually, like, say me, I'm Mexican, usually people who are, say there's an issue in the Mexican community, I usually tend to side with this community because I am a part of this community. In the book, they talk about the situation, I don't remember, but it was a artist who paid for their kids to go to a school and they weren't worthy of those grades. They lied. I think I remember me and you talking about this.
At UNC, actually, the school I graduated from.
So they talk about that, and how sometimes like people who work in like getting students into school from high school, they make decisions for like their family members, say, hey, can you like get my student in the school because we're a family? And they're like, yeah, we'll get it in, but can you like donate? And they don't realize the implications of those things. Just because like, for the most part, universities are pretty white. And so usually the people who are making these decisions are white, and they're helping their white peers kind of climb the ladder without them having to do any of the work. So I was just curious, like, have you ever found yourself like in a situation where you kind of tend to, I guess, appeal or want to help more of your community? You know, it might also be different for us because we kind of do fall under the minority as well.
Yeah, there are times in which I over empathize with you know, with a student that has a similar background to me. It's much easier to imagine their struggle. You know, if they're immigrants, if they came from another country and they're working and they're trying to make a life, and they're trying to be helpful to their parents because their parents don't speak English, you know, I can say that I have, it's almost like a internal biological understanding of that.
Yes.
So, and based on that knowledge that I have, I do tailor my mentoring or coaching of that student if he's in trouble or she's in trouble. I'm not saying that I'm going to make an exception, because that wouldn't be ethical, right?
Yes.
However, I approach it different, not because of a fairness issue, but because I'm able to understand the struggle that the student is having. So I can speak to certain parts of themselves that we may have in common, or I can understand, or I've seen friends go through. Versus a student that has a very different life story, and I don't have that internal knowledge. So am I different? Will I give that student, you know, he plagiarized if that student was, you know, Latin, and will I say, oh no, you have an A for this? No, I won't be that. But I might have a different conversation because I can understand the dynamics of, you know, where they're coming from. And I think that's the gift. If you're a good leader, you know your audience, and you work with what you know about your audience as a way of building a bridge of engaging them and having them join you in the situation.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's very valid. I think a lot of times, I mean, I've encountered situations where administrators have kind of come down to me and kind of talked to me and from my perspective and from my background. And that's kind of helped me kind of give in to them and talk to them and tell them about what I'm going on, what's happening in my life, and help them understand. Sometimes it is hard for white professors to understand me. Like in the business school, I've had a hard time, you know, sometimes with professors understanding my situation as a mom and them. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like they think I'm lying, or that would be a very big lie for me to say, like, hey, I have a kid and I'm not coming to class today.
Yeah. So, and I would call that, if you feel like they're responding to you like you're lying, I would say that faculty member is completely out of touch, right? That is a faculty member we need to educate. And that's what we need to do, you know, trainings and, you know, understanding, because we are a diverse community. Denver is becoming very diverse, and we all need to get on the train.
Yes, I agree. It's hard to get on that train. It's hard to get people on that train sometimes.
Some people don't want to climb it. We need to help them.
They don't want to meet us halfway.
Right. They don't want to jump on the train. So we need to help them come up with very persuasive and ethical arguments.
Yes.
To have them join us on the journey.
All right. Well, Marina, I just want to say thank you for being a part of this and for answering our questions. It was great to get to know you, and I'm sure they will also have a great time getting to know you. So I'll send you a lot of the stuff that I have. I'm sure you'd like to read it and digest it yourself. So